hello, and welcome back. How are you peoples? We have a good few people in the chat. Yay! So someone asked, 9 o'clock hero asks, what's the music from? The music, both of the music that you heard in my intro, is from the copyright-free playlists in YouTube. So thank you, YouTube, for having copyright-free music for people to actually use. But I am really, really excited today because we are, as the title suggests, we are having a little bit of a delayed book launch with Christopher Stanton. How are you?
I'm doing all right. How are you? Or
I'm
did it
great.
not? Oh, it did. Okay.
It on you. You're good. So you got in contact with me, and I'm really, really grateful that you did, because we in this community, or in my little section of the community, we do like to encourage each other and to help each other out. So when you said that you had a book, I was like, oh, interview. People need to know about it. Because it's one thing just telling people that there is a book out there, and it's another thing to actually get them invested in and understand why it's important to help each other out and to support each other. So I am absolutely fucking delighted that you are here.
Glad to be here.
Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit? Tell people a little bit about yourself?
No.
That's okay then.
No.
End of part 1.
You're right. No, my name's Christopher Stanton. I have a 40-hour-a-week job, but occasionally on the side I have a few hobbies, and writing just happens to be one of them. So, unfortunately, right now, the current county I'm living in the United States is making national attention for wanting book burnings. So that's kind of a strange thing to be publishing a book and then looking across, at somebody who's like, let's burn them.
Yeah, that's scary. Well, I mean, we need more authors in the world. We definitely need more interesting books. And you have released a new one, as you can see here on the screen, The Blind Servant. So how long ago did you release this as hardback?
So technically it's not in hardback. It's only in paperback, and it was released October of last year. And
nice.
I kind of just let it sit on the side because I was trying to get the audiobook done. I was trying to make sure the ebook and everything for it was done. And apparently it's a long process to learn how to get an audiobook. Wrong one.
Sorry. Random cat just popped up. Sorry.
Yeah, it took us about a year to get it all squared away. So it's been there in case somebody had tripped on it, but it's not. I hadn't been talking about it. I just kind of let it sit.
So it took you a long time, because Audible is like the king of, sadly, is the king of all audiobooks at the moment. So what was the process like to, it's well and good publishing your own stuff, but how was that process in trying to, first of all, get Audible's attention, but then to actually go through the process of creating an audiobook? Because that's very exciting.
So Audible does have one good thing about it that I've noticed so far, and that is they leave you alone if you tell them it's a DIY project. So I didn't have to go through their... I tried one of my previous books to go through Audible, but then they wanted me to hire people and all these like nightmare steps. So this go round, I decided I found somebody that I wanted to read the book. I reached out to them and said, hey, would you read the audio for me? They agreed. They learned a lot over the year as we were trying to figure out how exactly this works. So the hardest part this go round was I had to format it for them in MP3, make sure all the chapters were in order. So it kind of was easy, and the review process, which I thought was going to take longer, I only had 2 errors that I had to fix, so it went pretty good.
Fantastic. And Tati has just put the links there in the chat, so thank you, Tati. You talked about the process of writing the other books. So how many other books have you written?
Currently, I have available 3. The Ravenwolf Sagas, Book 1 and 2, and Hunter Saga, Book 1. They're whereas The Blind Servant is fantasy, those 3 are science fiction, dark future. So they're kind of, if you like the fantasy one, it'll be a coin toss if you like the other ones.
That is amazing. So tell us about the book. What is your current book about? I know that's an easy thing to ask, but what does it? What's the story?
So what it is throughout the history of the world, there have been a group of magic users that are known as hybrids. And everybody kind of hates them because normal magic users are divided into either holy magic, which are paladin, or elemental magic, which are just elementals. And the hybrids can actually combine both of their abilities and become effectively walking nightmares if they become corrupt. So some of them in the past, in fact, prior to where this book starts, 6 others had become corrupt. They turned themselves into blood knights and basically destroyed parts of the world wholesale. So this book is following one of the hybrids who everybody's kind of keeping him at an arm's length. They don't really want to deal with him because they're afraid he'll become another corrupt blood knight. And so it's basically following him through how he started his life, how he ended up as where he was, and then when they kick him out and essentially exile him, it's the various times he tries to restart his life. And he's like, okay, well, I'm going to be a sailor this time. And then it doesn't entirely work. So then he's like, I'm going to be a mason. And it doesn't entirely work. So it's effectively him stuck in exile, trying to live life and still follow the rules.
Yeah.
And eventually he's trying to get back home.
So I started listening to it on Audible. I listen to a lot of my books from Audible. And one of the interesting things was there's an incredible lifespan that you've given these creatures. So how did you come up with the idea that they could live for so long?
Because it's a dream of mine to be immortal. What it is what it really boils down to is because they're magic users, it's not that they live so long for any other reason except the magic keeps them alive. Because they know how to use it. It constantly heals them. It constantly regenerates them. So it's not that they'll live forever, but their life is now extended because of magic.
That is incredible. When it came to writing the book, because it starts out in the present tense, you're talking about you meet all the characters. There is a rich history that you've created, and then it actually delves into that history. So in terms of the narration style, how did you settle on a style first of all? Because that's something that fascinates me with especially in the realm of science fiction. How did you settle on that style to say, actually, we are going to take a deep dive into this person's history?
What it boils down to is 2 things. First, I like to write my books as if you were watching them on TV.
Yeah, I really got that.
I was like, I know people are interested in things as long as they're relativistically simple, even when they're in depth, but they're also like it changes enough that it keeps your attention because it's not one long boring thing and then you move on to another long boring thing. So it's like I deliberately tried to break it up. The second half of it is I write it about 30 times before I settle on how it's going to finish because I want it to sound the way I want it to sound as I read it in my head. So I have to go back and fix things and say, okay, if I wanted people to understand this, did I miss anything previously and like prior to this where they're going to ask a question?
Yeah.
Because plot holes are basically questions. It's like, well, so-and-so did this. Why? What was his reason? And if you've left that out, you've given them a reason to quit reading. It's kind of like, oh, well, he didn't explain that, and that's something I wanted to know. So I'm trying to keep your attention, but at the same time ask, is this enough information for them to continue with the book?
So do you write, are you one of those writers who will start at the beginning and write all the way through, or would you start at the end or halfway through, or how does that process work for you?
So what I have is an Excel sheet of this person's life, and I am kind of strange with the way I write, meaning all of these chapters are short stories. Effectively, they could be, you could take out the main character, put in your own character, and the story still works.
That's interesting.
So what I have is I have this Excel sheet of however many different things I decide to put this character through. And, there are some days I feel happy, so I want to write one of the ones that is not as grim. And then there are other days where it's like I've had a bad day and I'm like, I'm going to hurt this guy. So
poor guy.
yeah, I write it out of order. And sometimes I'll write, like, let's say I'm working on chapter 3, and then my brain will be like, well, this will fit really well in chapter 7. So I'll go write it down so I don't lose it from my mind. And then
Yeah.
maybe I'll come back to chapter 3, or maybe I'll get sidetracked to go to chapter 4.
Fantastic.
So it's
That's
like,
interesting.
I know how the series is going to end in general. I know how I'm going to get from where it is to where it ends, but I haven't locked anything in stone. And there are days where I'll sit there and think about it and switch it 3 times in my head to see if something sounds better than something else. So it's kind of, that's why they're all short stories.
That's great. I mean, to be able to create short stories and to be able to remove a character or the main character and still have the story make sense is a very hard thing to do, and to actually then chronicle it into one solid story. And it is a solid story. I'm about halfway through it at the moment on the audiobook. And what's remarkable is Audible. I've just gotten another prompt. I got one before we went live. I got another prompt there from Audible saying, "Finish it. Come on, continue." And that's what I love about Audible. They'll remind you. But it is a solid story. And what's interesting for me, especially in the realm of kind of science fiction, is how, in your mind, do you go from writing these stories of different people while not overlapping with previous authors? Because obviously you're going to be drawn in by your by the people that you're inspired by. But how do you reach that balance of not being plagiarism to bring something, because that was fresh, that was really interesting to hear.
So one of the best things that I've ever done is I've never written something and left it alone. So I have a copy of this, and I say this book, it's actually elements of this book that go back to when I was in high school, like 25 years ago. And what I did is I started thinking, so let's say it had elves in it at one time. And I was like, no, that's too much Tolkien, So I want to keep humans because we know what humans are. It would be really hard for me to sell you on something that wasn't human and still tell the story. Mm-hmm. However, I don't need to bring in races that don't exist, like elves, dwarves, giants. But at the same time, I can bring in things that don't exist, like spiders that are the size of people. And, they're there to creep you out because the more legs it has, the more weirded out we get. And, there's an entire section in the book where it's effectively 2 people saying, I don't like spiders because they have to go visit the spiders.
Oh, Critical Cripple loves spiders, doesn't he? He loves that part. I hate spiders. Well, just really, really quickly, just so you know that you have support there. Rob Parks for $5 says, great first chapter. Looking forward to hearing the rest of it. I like the pagan elements. I'll ask you about that now in a second. And Taddy Bogle for £2 says, new series coming soon. Rob reviews also 33. There you go, Taddy. There you go. I don't understand why people are so obsessed, but okay. When it came to your style, when it came to giving these characters the backstory, there are a lot of pagan elements. Is paganism something that you have looked into in a sense, or was it just for this book?
Okay, so let's talk about my previous lives for a moment. When I graduated college, the first time of the 3 times I was in college, I had a degree in anthropology. So I am all about world history, culture, religion. So when I started writing these books, and the further you get along, the more you'll realize that I've pulled cultural and linguistic elements out of pretty much the whole history of the world. So there's a section in there, or a line in there, where the main character talks about um, the three goddesses, that the three sisters, and he references them to Clotho, and I can never remember the other two and how to pronounce them. But those are the three witches from Greek, like Greek stories, the three fates.
Ah.
So these elements are in there, and depending on your life and your history, you're going to understand some of them, and others you won't.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I got an answer for you, Taddy. Hold on.
we're definitely getting that. We're getting to that. So on that question, well, first of all, what kind of authors would you have grown up with? Who would have been your biggest kind of influences in not even becoming an author, but your authorship style?
Okay, so the big two are Frank Herbert and J.R.R. Tolkien, one of the great sci-fi and one of the great fantasy writers. Unfortunately, Tolkien died the year I was born, because looking back on it, it would have been great to meet the guy just for like 10 minutes.
Yes.
Moving forward, Piers Anthony. I don't know if you've ever read the Xanth series, or the Immortal series that he wrote.
The Immortals I've read.
So a lot of those are the ones that I would pick up and read, mostly because they were on my bookshelf, either because my mom had collected them or my brother had checked it out of the library, something like that. But then at the same time, there's also the elements of so I have the book sitting over here, the entire history of Shakespeare, and like we need
so
that.
Have I. Oh my god, I have that.
And it's kind of like, so he was good at making up words. He was good at making up scenes that are just absolutely mind-bogglingly strange, but you still understood them.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the mix that I wanted. Was like I wanted people to understand that these are fantasy elements. I wanted people to understand that these are like other authors, where I draw the inspiration from other authors, but at the same time, I wanted to be able to create an entire world all of my own. One where nobody knows me, there's no warrants, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that's where I was working for.
And so what actually inspired you then to become a writer seriously, to actually, because it's one thing, we all want to be a writer, or we all want to be a singer, or we all want to do this, or a musician, but it's a furthering of a step to actually go away and lock yourself away, in a sense, or do you lock yourself away to become an author and to actually write things down on a page, and then to go again and try get it published and everything else, and the barriers that exist there. What actually made you take this seriously and put pen to paper?
Okay, so my general answer for this is always not real, but I used to tell everybody that I saw a study somewhere where 9 out of 10 of the last American Pulitzer Prize winning authors were alcoholics, and I wanted to emulate them and at the same time write a book.
Yeah.
What it really was is I was bored in school growing up. I was lazy, but I was still ahead of the class most of the time. So I started writing notes and taking stories, and and then when I went to college, it got a little more in depth because somebody told me to take an English class. And then one day I just decided, I have all these stories that have been like rattling around in my skull. I'll see if I can put them down. And that's kind of how it is. And as far as locking myself away, I usually don't. My computer's in the living room of my house. When I'm typing, most of the time I have music on in the background, and I'll have like a sports something on the TV, because the TV will be muted, but my eyes kind of need to see the motion off in the corner to know that the world's still happening or something. And then I need something to block other sounds out. So it's like I'll have motion in the corner, I'll have music in my ears, and then I'll just be typing.
Yeah, that's. I don't know if I could do that. Does it would writing energize you, or would it exhaust you to the point where it's just like, okay, now I can sleep?
So when I'm actually writing, time seems to disappear. I've known on a few occasions where it's like I'll start writing and it's like 5 in the morning on a weekend, and then I'll blink and it's 8 o'clock at night, and I'll have like an extra 50 pages written for whatever. But there are sometimes in the kind of lulls in the book where I have to kind of explain a bunch of things that are a little bit boring, where when I'm done writing it and I know I need to go back and edit it, I'll put it away for a couple days because it's just mentally draining to think about the not exciting
yes. Editing sucks. I'll completely, as someone who tries to edit videos and is shit at it, I completely agree. Editing sucks in every form.
Yeah. And even though you go back through the book 10, 12, 13 times, if you hand it to somebody else with a pen, they'll circle all your mistakes. It's like your brain.
Well, that's part of it. You need someone with fresh eyes to come in and have a look and to proofread, but that's part of the process as well. You're never going to catch everything.
And you can't, because your brain will start, what you wanted to say, so your brain makes it real, even though the words might not be there or misspelled.
So when you've started a project, because obviously you've done 3 others, and yes, they're a different makeup, but when you start a project and you get an idea, if you're not beside your laptop, are you one of these people like myself who'll write? I always have to have a pen and paper with me, or I'll get like crazy. Are you one of those people who will be sitting in the middle of a street and just like write?
Yes. Wherever I am, if it's something that I'm worried that I'm going to forget, meaning I haven't had it play in my head 4, 5, 6 times, I'll write it down. And the best thing about that is I can bring a story idea home. I can try to flesh it out a little bit. Do I want it to do this? Can I make it do that? And I've actually trashed story ideas because it sounded really good. And then I tried to work it out. Yeah. But that doesn't mean, and when I say I trash it, what that really means is I put it to the side, because I have pirated other books and like stolen stuff from them and then changed it to fit the book that I'm working on. So it's not that idea goes away completely. It's just it'll probably be revamped into something else.
Taddy has another question. Do you write one book at a time, or do you have more than one project on the go at the same time?
So when I am actively writing, it's one book. So in this case, right now in front of me, I have The Blind Servant Book 2 open.
Nice.
The problem is when I'm just trying to get ideas and flesh things out, I have 120 different stories right now. Ravenwolf.
That's pretty amazing.
Ravenwolf has a 3rd book. Hunter has 2 more books. Those 2 groups are part of a 6-generation series that I'm writing. That it's you're following one family through the generations, and
that's incredible.
Ravenwolf and Hunter are in the same generation, but they're on 2 completely different paths. So it's like I have this entire series, and then there are one-off books where somebody would read one of my books and say, well, where did this character come from? And all of a sudden my brain's like, crap, now I have another character. It's like, it's like I'll mention them, or they'll do something in the book and somebody's like, well, I want to know about this guy too. So all of a sudden I might have another one-off book where it's...
Yeah, because I'm one of those people. I don't know if you've ever done this, but I'm one of these people who will read a book and I'll be as interested as I am in the main character. I'll be thinking about the secondary characters and the tertiary characters and thinking, what's their story? What's their story? Because that's what I used to do when I was bored. I would take the background characters and just like make little stories for them.
And that's actually, I actually have about 4 or 5 storylines that deal directly with ancillary characters. It's like in this one book, they're there for like a chapter, but then I could make up a book for them entirely because they have as rich of a background history as the main character does from the book. And I just haven't told anybody yet because I had no need to at the time.
It was great listening to the audiobook because there are kind of little accents that come in and everything else. Is that something that you think? Do you hear their voices when they're speaking? Or do you hear your own voice?
Well, see, it's funny you mention it that way, because when I hear somebody else reading it, I hear their voice and their voice alone with their nuances, because as an anthropologist, I've trained myself to listen to other people, mostly because it's not always what they say, but sometimes what they don't say that can clue you into a mental state or an idea that they're working on or something you need to know. But when I'm writing my character and I'm sitting behind my computer, type, I hear their voices in my head as their own voices. They're not
Wow.
my voice, and I'm not actually hearing voices. I'm not schizophrenic, but like
No, but
I
that
can,
is part of the creative process.
right, and I can hear their nuanced languages and their new, and like the way they're talking specifically in my mind. So that way, it's easier for me to write them, because I know they're not really a separate person, but they kind of are. And when two of them are
Yeah,
interacting, I know what both sides, how they would normally act, how they would normally speak, and you can bend stuff like that. So
that is incredible. Audrey Rabideau has a question for you. How long did it take for you to go from the first rough draft to your published work?
okay, so for the first book I wrote, which was Hunter Saga Book 1, probably the better part
I
of a
am
decade.
putting in the chat right now. A
Um,
decade.
yeah, because it was based on an idea I had when I was in college, and then I put it away. And then I found it again, and I was like, I have more ideas to add to this. And it's kind of like total writing time for any given book is 1 to 2 years, but the delay in between, because you might hit a spot where you have writer's block, where you're like, okay, I made it to this point, but I needed to go to a different point. How do I bend or twist the story properly so it doesn't seem like it's a chop shop?
Mm-hmm.
And that can take a long time. Like, it might take 6, 7, 8 months before your brain finally clicks over an idea that's like, well, if you went from here to here to here to here, it'll actually work. And then you have to go write it down. So for the first one I wrote, it was decades. For The Blind Servant, it was a year and a half from first draft to published last October, and then another year to get the audiobook out, because I had never done an audiobook before. However, knowing that I have somebody to do the audiobook, the next one, I'm halfway through the second book, so it will probably be 6 months to get a published version, maybe 8 months. And then it'll take him less time to do the audiobook this go round, because he'll know what he's doing.
So, did you contact the person that did the audiobook, or did they contact you? In which case, like, how did you settle upon that person? Because it's one thing having people read your stuff, but then having them read it out loud is a whole different kettle of fish.
So the way the first attempt went, and I tried it with the Ravenwolf Saga Book 1. Going through Audible, they wanted me to put it up and listen to auditions and find somebody and pay somebody, and does that person get royalties? Do I get royalties? And it became kind of a walking nightmare, so I threw it away and put it down. But then I was flipping through YouTube, and I came across his YouTube handle is The Click, if anybody wants to go find him. I'll leave his real name out of it, although if you listen to the audiobook, you'll hear it anyway. And I had just been watching his videos, and I really liked the metered rhythm of his voice. Like, he was always, it wasn't monotone, but it wasn't like he would suddenly scream and then, get really quiet. He had a very even, very metered, very enunciated voice. So I reached out to him across Discord and said, would you be interested in doing an audiobook? And he wrote back, he said, I've never done one of those before. And I said, hey, it's a learning experience for everybody. And part of the caveat to all of this was I told him, we'll get through the audiobook. As we get through it, don't stop doing your YouTube creations for it. Because it's not that I wasn't paying him. Of course I was, but it wasn't going to be enough to replace YouTube. So I didn't want him to stop doing his creative works on YouTube, because I wasn't going to be able to cover his downtime.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, yeah, I reached out to him, and he agreed to do it. We learned a lot over the last year, trying to like get everything together, get all the proper audio context, get it set for Audible. Worked out fine, and here I am with my very first audiobook.
Again, it amazes me that people will actually take that step. And although it's complicated and it takes a lot of work to actually get and do it instead of just talking about doing it, that's a phenomenal achievement. And it's entertaining. It is actually entertaining. So the story, if you're listening to it, continue listening to it. Probably a bit further on than a few of you, because I see Rob has downloaded it. But it's definitely worth a listen. If not worth reading, if you're not into reading, it is definitely worth listening, because you can really visualize it. And that's the thing with all great fiction. You can visualize it. When I was going into university, one of the questions that I was asked is like, let's say you were going to see a play, what would be the most important thing? Because my secondary was English, English lit. And I said, I'd rather be at home reading the book. If a performance is bad in a play, I'd rather be home hearing the voices in my head as I'm reading it, and when you're listening to it, one thing that does stand out is that you can see it, you can visualize it, you can hear these characters coming to life. And I can't wait to actually finish it and to get more.
The thing that I like about when you write something is you can tell somebody they said something in a gruff voice, and it's different for you in your mind than it is for me in mine. So short of trying to in-depth explain somebody's accent, you're letting them build part of the character too. It's like, I give you the foundation, I give you this description, and then when you hear the voices in your head about these people and what they're doing, you kind of make it your own, and that makes it better. Because and that's why I kind of don't like movie adaptations as much as I probably could if I could get over myself, is all of a sudden they give you this version of the character and it may not mesh with the one that you built, like when you were reading it or when you were handling it. So,
well, I mean, one of the greatest examples of that is you look at and surprisingly for me it worked. If you watch The Golden Compass, shit movie, great book, but if you watch The Golden Compass and then you compare it with the and some of the characters in The Golden Compass and how they're presented in that movie, and then I hated it. I hated it. And then you watch His Dark Materials, which is the BBC version, and how they've done it. Does that for like, it's just an amazing thing to actually see how the same character can be so radically changed just by the actor.
right.
And so my question is, when you hear people performing your work like you did with the audiobook, does that change the characters in your head? Do you then hear the person that read the audiobook, or do you still hear your original characters?
So when I'm listening to the audiobook, I deliberately force myself to understand that that is not me. And therefore I can hear the characters in that voice and not be annoyed by it. But if somebody were reading it off the screen as I was typing it, I would probably have to smack them and drag them outside. Just because I need my interpretation of the character to write them. And then, but if somebody else is like messing with me, then it's throwing off what I believe the character should be. So they can have their own version of them in their mind, but don't mess with mine as I'm writing them. But again, if I were to listen to them, or even if somebody for some stupid reason turned this into a movie one day, I could go watch it and not be upset at the way the character is portrayed unless they completely boggle the whole damn thing. But it's my ability to turn off and on when I need to hear their voice in the voice that I gave them.
And so because when you're going to write the second book, that's what I'm interested in. Are you going to hear the voice of the person doing it on audiobooks when you're actually doing it, or can you separate out and hear the original voice?
I can still separate out and hear the original voice.
Brilliant.
Probably because I didn't listen to the audiobook straight through. It was as pieces came in and as we were working with them, so it was kind of very chopped up. It wasn't one continuous. And in the interim between the pieces I was listening to, I'm still writing the second book. So I still hear the voices in the voice that I gave them originally. And when I hear the audiobook, it's literally just me like, does it sound like they got the names right? Does it sound like that nice even meter
So it's
tone that
more
I
the
need?
technical stuff.
Yeah. And you just kind of tune out the voice when you're writing your own because, I mean, the reality of the situation is you can't let somebody else's voice get into your character because unless they're going to be that voice permanently. So if the click got run over by a bus, and I'm not saying I hope he does or anything,
Hopefully
but
not.
yeah, then I would need somebody else to do the next book.
Yeah.
So I can't make his voice the voice of the character because he he may or may not be doing the entire series. I'd like him to do the entire series because I think one voice throughout the entire group is will help everybody stay involved with it. Um, but I can't count on that. He might decide he doesn't want to do another one. And okay, so do I then have to wait to hear the next one and see if the character changes again? And the answer is no.
Yeah.
I want my character to be my character as long as I am typing the books.
Brilliant. And that's the correct way to go. Because again, you don't know who's actually going to do the next set. So staying true to that original voice that you've developed is incredible. And it's an incredible show of strength in your writing that you're able to do that.
Whiskey helps.
Whiskey helps everything. I'm just going to say that right now.
Line a little
Rob
bit.
Parks. Rob Parks is asking because you've self-published these books.
Yes.
Are you planning to get an agent, or is that something that you would be open to, or do you like the fact that you have total control? And what is that control like when you're talking to someone like Amazon or someone like Audible? What's that input process for them?
So for a while when I was first writing, I was trying to get an agent to hang on to it. But then I realized that they have to be discerning, whereas self-publishing doesn't. I mean, the reality is if my book is crap, it won't sell, but I can still publish it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to keep it all my own because, yeah, I don't want to go through the trouble of having third parties unless like with the click, it's to do the audio. Like it is a third party, but he has one specific goal, whereas the a book agent would be like, when's your next book coming out? Do you have any others that you want me to handle? And then, do we do it online in bookstores? And it gets weird really quick. So I'm going to stay self-publishing. And as far as the input, so Amazon and Audible have, since they're the same company anyway, they both have similar review processes where one of the things they do is they run it through a spell checker for the paperback, which is fun because when you make up names that aren't real names, like that people name their children, every page is going to have like 4 marks on it.
Let's mess with the system.
Yeah. And then, but they also they do catch some of the mistakes. They do catch like extra periods and, where you double tapped at the end of a sentence for whatever reason.
So we don't have any space commas in here? No space commas, people.
Okay.
There are people who understand the reference. Mr. E-Man for 333, just like, yeah. Thank you for making me say 333. Again, people on topic here, please. Right. So JC said something really interesting. I read the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the trilogy, then consumed the media, and everyone sounded and looked exactly how I expected them. So in your mind, if you had the option, who would be playing your leads?
Ooh. See, had we been talking about one of the other books, like I had those mapped out already. But for the Blind Servant, I don't have any. Yeah, I don't have any for the Blind Servant. So when I was writing Ravenwolf Saga, there was a character that was, he's written a lot like Samuel L. Jackson, because I kind of wanted Samuel L. Jackson to read the character in the audiobook, even though I knew that was never going to happen. And some of the other characters are similar to ones from movies or other things where I really liked the character they were playing. So I kind of wrote it in that style. But when I was writing The Blind Servant, since I was trying to actively avoid things like Lord of the Rings, I deliberately didn't choose people that I wanted to be part of the book. Like, I wasn't writing a voice thinking, if somebody was ever on this.
Absolutely. We have another question. Apparently on topic. What is the 333rd word in The Blind Servant?
It's probably the.
It's tree. The answer is tree. No. A real question, though. Thank you, Audrey Rebedew. Do your real world personalities influence your character development? So obviously you can see little bits. You're writing fantasy, so you're writing sci-fi. So do you see bits of yourself, your own personality, coming out in those characters? And what would be the closest that you've ever come to kind of really putting in one of your personality traits?
So the answer is unfortunately yes. No matter how hard you try, you're not going to be able to leave yourself out of it because it's coming from your mind. So even if it's something as simple as word choice that a character uses, you're kind of stuck in it. However, I am not one of those authors where everything has an illusionary factor. Like, if I tell you the sky is blue, it's probably blue. The closest I've come... So the secondary character in The Blind Servant's second chapter, Araminta, is actually based on a friend of mine.
Okay.
So when you talk about putting real world personalities into books, I do. But that's because I believe the traits that, like, my friend has are the traits that this character would have anyway. So it gives me a starting point that gets changed. So let's say I decided to put myself as the main character. You know, I stand 6 foot even. Like, you know, I have brown hair, blue eyes. So that might be the start of my character. But by the time I'm done writing it, it doesn't resemble me anymore in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
But some of the nuances with language or words, like, one of the biggest things you have to worry about is using modern slang and lexicon in the book, because that world probably doesn't have it. So none of my characters should go totes my goats.
Aw.
Yeah,
they
sorry.
should. They should. They absolutely should. I'm just saying that now.
Maybe it'll be in the deleted chapter.
But actually, on that, like, are there any edits? Have you actually taken any stories out that didn't work? And in which case, one, are you going to work on it for the second book, or is there something that you wish you could have made work but it just didn't for that story?
So for the first book, for The Blind Servant, there were 2 or 3 other short stories that were in the book that I've moved into the second book because they fit better. There is a story in one of my other books that I have removed completely, and it's a short story intermission chapter. So in my other books, you would be following the main character, and then all of a sudden there would be a chapter that just doesn't seem to fit. And a good example is, like, if you've read the Jungle Book, the story of Rikki Tikki Tavi, it adds something to the book, but it's not the main plot of the book. But as I had finished writing that, and then I went back and read the book, and I thought, I just couldn't leave it in there, because it was solely in there at the time to show you how messed up this future world that I had built was. And I had already done a pretty good job of that with the rest of the book, so there wasn't a need to have it anymore. So I still have it. It's still a single chapter. It's still a short story, but it's not currently in any book. And I don't have a book that I can put it in currently. So it's just probably going to sit there.
Well, what I would suggest, and this is just my opinion, what I would suggest is maybe some of those stories is to just like keep them on the laptop under random short stories and maybe publish a book when you have enough of them that they just didn't fit anywhere, and just publish them as just short stories.
I actually have a book like that in process. It's
Yay.
a bunch of stories that are concurrent to The Blind Servant but don't actually serve any purpose in the main storyline, but they're still in the same world. You run across the same characters from time to time. Like, it's almost like if you look at a secondary movie, but some of the original movie characters are cameoed.
Yes.
So I have 3 stories that I think it's 3. It might be 4, but I have a group of them that are complete. They're complete chapters, and they're ancillary to the main story, but they might get. I did have a book named The Lost Chapters once, just for the record, and I can always dredge it back up. But it was. But yeah, I do have I keep them. I don't delete anything until I've published out a final. So now that I've published The Blind Servant, I went back and took all of the notes that are in The Blind Servant and have discarded them now because I don't need them anymore. I've made my choice on the final, set, whatever. It's going to stay that way. But anything that wasn't used in that book, I hold on to because it might come up again later. So
we have clarity. We have clarity on the 333rd word is call. Why does Rob know that? Because Rob is reading the book.
Right.
Yeah. Which all of you weirdos should do. Which
is something I'd like to ask is, why did you count?
Why not? We needed to know. The chat wanted to know. We needed to know. Rob took one for the team. Egress. It's not egress, Clive. Okay, it's not fucking egress.
In the entirety of all 4 books that I have published, I've used the word egress once, and it was not in The Blind Servant.
Okay, grand. I can calm down now. I'm okay. I'm okay. As long as it's not there. No, I'm joking. I have a phobia against that word.
Why?
I have explained it on other streams. The stream that you missed, the showing of the rocket launch, the rocket recovery.
Right.
It was used excessively. And I mean...
by the announcers? Right.
Yeah, properly excessive. So yeah, but of course I said this on a stream and Clive will not let it go, asshole. But never use the word again.
If you ever have...
as a personal favor, please don't use the word again.
Right. So if you ever have a problem with something like this, just make up something else that people will get annoyed with. So tell them that you had a bad piece of chicken, and then you can say egrets. I've had a few.
Oh no, because then again, I'll never live that down either. But it's good fun. It's good fun. So if there's, I know there's a few in there with wrenches. So the link for the book, hang on, because I'm shit when it comes to multitasking. For this book, the link for this book is in the it's going to be put into the chat by my mods because they're awesome. Any minute now, and it's in the description as well. So if you do want to check out the Blind Servant, it does mean a lot to actually support members of the community when they take that risk and put themselves out there. It's a big deal. It is a big deal, and I thank you for doing it.
Well, if nothing else, if I can take you to a different world and help you forget the rampaging stupidity in this one for like half an hour, it's worth it.
for a half an hour for 8 hours. It's amazing. Just yeah, get the I like the audiobook. I really like the audiobook because again, it, as you said, it's a very chill voice. He doesn't overdo things, he doesn't oversell things. Because there's I've listened to audiobooks where the person has shouted the words, where it just doesn't call it's not called for, or they'll over embellish and it just takes away from the actual experience. So I really, really appreciate the voice that's on the audiobook. So
Well,
well done on that.
I'll say, yeah, specifically why I asked him to do it is because after watching him on YouTube for countless videos, it was kind of like that very even metered voice was just like, if you're going to listen to an audiobook, this is the kind you want.
So yeah, who did the cover art?
Okay, that's mine, 100%. That's me taking some, it's not quite clip art, but it was like royalty-free images and just kind of slapping them over each other.
Nice. Because when I was creating the thumbnail for this, and I was using this image, the first thing I was on a call with Tatty, and the first thing he said, "Ooh, there's a skull. I like it." Because it's a bold thing to go for on a book cover. It's okay for inside, but like, thankfully they allowed you to keep that art. It's brilliant.
Yeah, the only problem they
really
had is if you get a copy of the paperback, the Blind Servant title is above the image and it's in a different script, but because they wanted people to be able to read it while they were looking through Audible, they made me change the script for the title.
So. Yeah, I do have that one somewhere. But yeah, the actual paperback has the different color, but I do like the bit of the splash of color in that one as well, where it is the red. Whoever chose that was
well, like I
genius.
said, I did the whole thing. It was like I sat down on my computer with like Photoshop one day and I was just like, I wonder what I can do.
I like it. I like it.
In case anybody wonders, that symbol is actually the symbol for the Blood Knights. So all the people that are like that have gone corrupt and everything have some version of that symbol as their kind of like personal marker. So it's going to be on all of the books.
So the words "the" and "servant" are in black on the paperback for some reason.
Yes.
That was purposely done. That was done for a reason that you have to guess now, Rob. No, colon. I'm not going to ask him that. Feck off. Again with the trees. Like, Christ.
Actually, one of the big things they talk about throughout the book is the family histories. Like everybody, as part of their training as either a holy knight or one of the elementals, it's like you need to know your entire family tree back to the origin of the house. So there are trees, but I don't go into great detail about them.
But they're family trees, and it's like the history that you've given these characters is incredible. There's a lot of detail in there, and it's not like rammed down your throat either. Like there is exposition, but it's not a heavy exposition. Obviously, you want people to know the background, but to be able to seamlessly put that into the narrative is very, very difficult.
Irony, maybe. I hadn't thought of that, but I just like the color contrast that went with it. When I was working, see, the one of the problems I had is actually the very first chapter, History and Hope, had a lot more exposition in it. And then I read it one day to myself, and I was like, I'm going to put myself to sleep with this. So I went back and I broke up the history with the characters that are talking in the first chapter. So instead of it just being one long exposition chapter, I threw in people having interactions in an environment.
Mm-hmm.
So you would read the history, but then you would be brought back to the fact that there's people doing stuff. And then you'd read more of the history, and then, you know, and a lot of the times I make it somebody's memory, or I make it somebody's thoughts on oh, hey, I read this history book and it said X, Y, and Z. So you get the information, but it's not, like you said, it's not, I'm beating at you over the head with it.
So here's a question. When you're reading, or even when you're writing, what in your mind actually makes a good story? What makes you enjoy? Because obviously you need to enjoy what you're writing when you're reading it back. So what is it that makes a good story?
There needs to be two elements to it. First of all, it has to keep your attention. Even if the storyline itself is what they would call like a tried and true storyline, if you can make it interesting enough, then people will want to read it anyway, even though they know how it's kind of going to end, because they're like, oh, this is a revenge story. So in the end, they're probably going to get their revenge, unless you have the other tried and true twist, which is something goes wrong and they don't. But the one thing that to me has always made a good story is you shouldn't have a lot of questions to ask yourself. So if a character does something, you shouldn't ever need to ask why. Or it should have been explained why they deviated from their normal actions to do something. And that makes it continuous. And a continuous story will always be better, even if it's an old tried and true type, trope. So to me, it has to keep your attention, and it has to not have holes that, like, how a hole in the road will mess up your car. You don't want a
Yeah,
hole in the book where all of a sudden you quit reading the book because you're thinking, well, never did that before. Why is it all of a sudden they did it now?
exactly.
Unless there's an explanation.
So here's a question: is there any? Because we had Johnny O here earlier, and it just like this question just popped in. Are there many plot holes in this book? Can you see many plot holes?
So there are 2 or 3 that are deliberate, because I didn't
Okay.
want to. I didn't want to give away what was causing something originally. And actually, I see in the chat, yes, there are actually 4 sister goddesses, but the 4th one is considered blasphemy. It's like you don't ever talk about them. You don't ever, just they don't exist as far as most people are concerned. But you'll hear about it anyway as the books go on. So yeah, there are 4. But there are deliberate plot holes because I just don't want to reveal something yet, or I will give you something that isn't entirely true. I always call it the sin of omission. It's like, well, you could have told us that. And like, well, I could have, but it might have changed your mind about something. So I left it out. And then later on, it comes on, and they're like, well, now we understand why it happened the way it happened. And then you're revealed to see that there was no plot hole there. It was, I kind of made it a ghost. So later on, I could actually tell you why it happened the way it happened.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest plot holes in the Lord of the Rings that I really love annoying people with, and I think you know what I'm going to say, is why the fuck didn't the Eagles just take them to Mordor? Why not? What happened to the Eagles? Why did they only come in parts of the story? I know then you wouldn't have a story, but still, come on, plot hole. Why didn't the Eagles just take them all the way to Mordor? Would have been easier.
The real
I
answer
love
to
winding
that
people up.
can be found in some of the other books, like the
Yes,
Silmarillion, and that is
Samurai. That's
they try
exactly
not
what
to
I was thinking.
interfere.
Yeah.
I mean, they do
But I mean, that's the point. They do. They're there. They bring Frodo back from Mordor.
right,
Spoiler. But like that for people who are diehard Tolkien fans, because I've read all of the Lord of the Rings. I've read the Silmarillion. I've read a lot of the supporting books as well. But I just love winding people up. It's like, well, since they got involved anyway,
right.
why didn't they just take them all away? Like, because then you wouldn't have a story. Simple as that. But I love pointing out shit like that.
Well, one of
Um,
my favorites has always been, if you ever hear the history of Tolkien, he wrote The Hobbit as a children's book,
yeah,
and then he wanted to publish a whole bunch of other books, but everybody kept asking, when are you going to write a sequel to The Hobbit? And he was like, I'll get to it one day, just go away.
not right now.
Well, the funny part is, and this is one of the things that I've always annoyed Tolkien fans with, is The Lord of the Rings almost seems like an ancillary thought to The Hobbit. And he was like, well, what am I going to use for a sequel? Oh, he picked up this ring in a cave. Because while it helps The Hobbit sometimes, it was never about the ring. They had their own thing that they had to do. And even though he used it, it wasn't the central idea. So it's almost
Yeah,
like when he went back, he's like, I need something to
it
write a
was secondary.
sequel. Oh, I'll take this ring. And he just built the
Yeah,
world around it. It's like, and they get annoyed too because they tell me it's not the way it worked, and if you read all the other books, and it's like I have, and I get it, but I always just found it funny that it seems like it's an ancillary thought. It's like I went from the Hobbit, we went from getting the dwarves back, and we went from this, and then all of a sudden we have a ring. It's like, what are we going to do
yeah.
with this? Okay, let's write a story about it.
And the ring actually turned out to be the bigger story, which is in the minds of people, which is incredible. And he was writing for his peers when he was writing Lord of the Rings. He was trying to appeal, because that's why he went so in depth with the back history and everything else. He was writing it as if it was a scientific text, which is just remarkable. In terms of world building, he put so much energy into it. How was that process for you when you were building this world? Was it just that it just came to you, or did you actually have to work on those kind of layers?
So what happens when I'm world building is, in the case of this book, many years ago, I started out with a map, which is one of the influences I pulled off Tolkien, because he always had his maps about, where everything was in the world. And I just drew a map, and it's actually in the book in the front cover section. That's an
Which is why you
updated,
should get which is why you should get the physical copy if you can.
right? So it kind of gives you an idea of what the land looks like. Not everything's listed on it, of course, but and then I said, okay, so I have this. Essentially, it looked like an island when it started, and I was like, do I want to make it a continent, an island? Is it going to be large, small? And then I just said, okay, well, I need the plot to go with it. So what is my plot? And when I first developed the plot to this series, it didn't even have names for the characters. It was like MC1, which is main character 1, needs to do
Interesting.
this, and this, and MC2 gets in the way, or MC3 does, something else. And essentially I just started building it. And then as I built, so if you want to go to a town, you tell somebody, hey, I'm going to Nome, Alaska, so they can find it. Well, if you want to describe Nome, Alaska, so they understand where you're going, why you're going, you have to lay it out. So as this world progressed, it was like, okay, he starts here, so I have to describe here. And he's going to go here, so I'm going to need that description. But then in the interim, he travels here, 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 and slowly you just start piecing together all these different places that they went. And then that world builds itself over time, because anytime you deviate from what you've already built, you have to build something to go with it. And on top of that, you have to build in why it is the way it is, who lives there, what their alliances are. And all of a sudden, by the time you're done with your initial plot, you're going to have an entire world to go with it, because without it, your plot falls apart.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, well, we need to go into this forest. Well, who owns the forest? Are those people friends or foes? Are they likely to kill you on sight, or are they going to keep you at an arm's length and just watch? And once you've built all this up, it's kind of like, well, why are they your enemy? Oh, 300 years ago, somebody slapped somebody and now they're pissed off at us for, whatever. So you build these layers because you have to make sure there aren't questions in the book. And one of the hardest things to do, and this is the reason I have the spreadsheets and everything that I have, you can't miss it in the future either. So if I go to a town and I say the inn is on the left-hand side, I don't want to come back to it in a book later and say it was on the right-hand side. So I actually have maps of all of my towns. All
Wow.
of the islands, all of the temples that they go to. So that way, when I'm working with that individual place, I'm consistent. And That
Yeah.
gets back to no plot holes. It's like, well, why did they move the inn? I'm like, okay, so it burnt down and they moved it across the street. Well, whatever. You just don't want to leave that alone because you want
Of
to.
course. And it gives a more rich kind of flavor to it.
It does. And then, you also have to have political interactions, even if you don't want to. I mean,
Yeah.
it's kind of like, well, you have to travel to such and such kingdom. I'm like, well, that sucks. What if they gonna treat you like? And if you say the wrong word, are they gonna slap your teeth out? It's you have to have that cohesive set of layers in place. Otherwise, it's really boring.
Mm. Rob Parks asks an interesting question. In order to create a grim narrative, is character death a necessary element? And I'd actually go so far as to have any depth to any like loss is one of the things that we have to deal with in humanity, and one of the reasons why people look to the likes of sci-fi and fantasy is to learn how to kind of deal or process that emotion. So, is death something that you think is a necessary element for grim narratives or deep narratives, or is it just a fly by the story kind of thing for you?
So the way I try to work death in my stories is, first of all, I made death a character. Like Seraphina is the angel of death. Um, but then I try to leave that character as a character on its own. So when
Mm.
you handle a death in the story, you know that their soul or whatever is going to go see Seraphina for judgment, or they're going to be taken by one of the other goddesses. However, I don't need to have death standing there. I can use the loss of a person and how they are lost as to make the grim narrative, and keep the actual idea of death as a character in the background. Like, we all know it's coming, we all know it's going to happen, so I'm going to create this person and leave them in the background unless they have to interfere for some reason, and then use the loss of a person or how people react to the loss of a person to build the narrative around it. So death is not a necessary character, meaning I could write this entire book without killing off a person. But then at the same time, it leaves a hole in the character because they're going to have to deal with something at some point. And like, we all know that you can't have a battle between like 15 or 30,000 people or something and nobody dies. I mean,
Exactly.
so it's like I tried to take the character, I made them a standalone character. So when I needed to interact with death, I can interact with death like directly, or I can just say, this is happening. Somebody was praying to Seraphina to give them more time, and it just didn't work out. So I can deal with that loss and everything as its own unit, as opposed to the actual need to have death there.
Interesting. Hang on. The 1,000-page summary on the likes and dislikes of hobbits was riveting. Okay,
Yeah, no.
he's still talking about it.
Tolkien needed an editor, and he didn't have one. And
This is true.
I don't need to know how the leaves of Lothlorien fall, but at the same time,
We all needed to know that. Realistically, we all needed that. Like,
what we
this
needed
is a
was
break in the story.
the in-depth. He shows you what happens when you go too far in depth.
Yeah.
And
But there
that's
are
one of the.
people who really enjoy that.
And yeah, there are, but one of the things I was told years ago when I was writing books and I was trying to get one of them published is I asked somebody, why won't you publish my book? And they said, the education level of your book is too high.
Wow.
And I said, what do you mean? And they said, you have to write to a 6th grade reading level because that is the average, apparently, in my country, which hurts. And I was like, well, can't we just
Yeah.
try to up the education level a bit? And and they said, well, the problem is it won't sell because it's not written where a lot of people can read it. So when you overanalyze a leaf or something, you lose people who don't care about the leaves or don't care about they want the prime story. They want that kind of raw action where it's like you're going from A to A prime to B to C to F. They don't want to get bogged down in the details.
Apparently, that's the final nail in the coffin for Clive's book. Clive is way too intelligent to be in this chat, but I love the fact that he's here.
PhD,
Because
right?
he's Professor Doctor Clive Wells. Doctor Clive Wells. I love winding him up because he doesn't usually use his title. Doctor Clive Wells.
What I need is a pipe. Dr. Wells, I presume.
Yes, that'd work. That'd work. Yeah. What? Okay. So in The Blind Servant, what character do you hate the most writing for? Because there's always characters, like for me when I'm writing and I just write like fucking weird stories for myself nobody's ever seen, nobody ever will. But I like writing the assholes the best. Just because I'm able to come out with anything I want, like the most awful things that I would never hope to say in my life.
So the character that I hate writing the most in the Blind Servant series, anyway, is actually George Fredrickson. Okay. He is one of the Lord High Inquisitors, and he is the main character's uncle. And basically, they call them lawbringers, and what they are is they are the ones who know the law backwards and forwards. So anytime that you're charged with a crime, these are going to be the people that sort out which ones you violated, if you violated any, what evidence would be necessary to prove it. And basically, he is afraid of his nephew because his nephew is a hybrid and might become a Blood Knight one day. He mistreats his nephew. Like he promises his brother before his brother is frozen in ice. Spoiler alert. That he's going to take care of his nephew, and then not even 24 hours before or after Thorgan Fredrickson is no longer in the picture, he kicks him off to an orphanage. I mean, this guy's got a stick up his butt so far that you could, raise a flag on it. So I hate writing him because he is everything that I don't want to be in a character, which does kind of make it easier to write, because then, like you said, you can make him the biggest asshole in the world, and it's supposed to be that way. But you have to keep it in line with him being a lawbringer. So he's going to do a lot of stuff, but he's probably not going to break the law to do it. Yeah. But that doesn't mean he doesn't know how to push the law and bend it and twist it before it breaks. So
yeah, that's amazing.
And he's not even, somebody, Audrey wrote, villains are so much fun. And the problem is he's not actually, he's a villain.
But in his world, he's not the villain because he's there to enforce the law. And that's a weird dynamic. Because you could go for the all out like asshole that I will make my own rules or I'll manipulate the rules in the way that I see fit and I'll just fuck with everyone. But he's so like down the line.
Right. And the other thing is he will never break the law. He holds the Inquisition, which he's one of the higher ups in, as the gold standard, and everybody should want to be like the Inquisition, and everybody should want to follow the law so much that it's like squeezing water out their butthole or whatever.
He reminds me a bit, because I've just kind of gotten to his little parts. He reminds me a bit of Valjean from Les Mis.
Yes, he is very much an asshole lawbringer.
But he is so in love with the law, and the law defines everything he knows about the world, that to break with the idea is to destroy himself. Right. And that can't happen. And it's just interesting, even to really bend it where it's a level that's acceptable.
Which
is kind of
part of the part of the thing that I like about my main character is he's the son of a lawbringer. So, because Thorgan Fredrickson is a Lord High Inquisitor and a lawbringer, but because he's half paladin, half elemental, he's like, well, this is still within the law, but he'll push it till where it's like, 3 threads of a former blanket on this side of the law.
Mm-hmm.
And in his mind, as long as he is on this side of the law, he's fine. But he knows he's pushing it like right up to that razor's edge.
Yeah.
And he always has, and he even tells himself sometimes in his head, he's like, well, I can do this, and while that's probably a very threadbare reason, it's still on this side of the law.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting dynamic to have not only the main character's father, but his uncle be lawbringers who are like, the law is black and white, and then to have this guy that's like, well, the law is black and white, but if I say it this way, it's like right up to that line.
Well, I tell you what, I am absolutely loving listening to it. I might actually get a hard copy. I'm thinking of getting the hard copy just because I like to have. I have a lot of books, and I have my bookshelf, and I'm happy with having a hard copy. There's nothing like actually having the hard copy of a book. Which do you prefer? Do you prefer audiobooks, or do you prefer actually sitting down with a book?
So because I like to write with pen and paper, not sometimes I'll do it even when I'm sitting in front of my computer because I just like the feeling of it. I will always want the book
Yeah.
in front of me. And I have a
Yes.
paperback copy of every book that I've written. Or every book that I've published, excuse me. I have digital copies of most of the books that I'm still writing, but it needs to be in my library. It's like one of the main themes in a lot of my books is like these people have these grand libraries with books all over the place, and my house could be wall-to-wall bookshelves with books on them, and I would be happy.
Nice. Well, I'm gonna put if anyone has the links there to the books, to put them back into the chat again, just for anyone that showed up late, to let people know what this is about. Christopher Stanton here is a member of the community. I'm not going to say who, because who gives a fuck? But he is part of the community. He has published books, and this one, The Blind Servant, has just come out on Audible. So if you want to support him, and I really hope you guys do, because it is a good story. If you want to support him, the links are in the chat, and just go to Audible and look up The Blind Servant. It's worth it. It's definitely worth it.
What's going to happen is you're going to finish the book and you're going to come back on here like you're a complete asshole.
Oh, you are a complete asshole. I can, because I'm already like, what's coming next? I'm really excited about this, and I'm really, really thankful that you asked me to get involved and to kind of help promote it, because I'm not one of these people who promotes much on the channel, mainly because, of what I do. It's completely like not something you can't really sell conspiracies, So for anyone to actually come to me and ask for me to engage with it, it's really refreshing. I've enjoyed this. I really have.
The story behind me coming to you was funny too. When I was like, "Do you do ads?" And you're like, "What?"
Yeah, it was a weird thing. It's like, do you do adverts? And I'm like, I have AdSense. Like, in what context is this? Because I'm all people who know me. You need to give me a bit of context. I understand the hesitancy to say, I've kind of written a book, but I love this kind of engagement. I love talking to people about their projects, because half of my job or half of what I like to do as a creator is to break down the creator supporter barrier, and
Right.
to have someone that's actually willing to put themselves out there in the form of a book, and to bring their creativity out into the world. Of course, I'm going to support that. So just doing an advertisement to the book, as I was saying to you before, in my view, you don't really get a sense of the book just by doing an advert, and you don't really get a sense of who the author is. And so I hope by doing this, people really get a sense of who you are as a writer, and why they should support you, not just because you're a part of our community, but because, this is an exciting new story to read and to hear and to be a part of. So is there a character in the book obsessed with potatoes and goats with a dictator? No, there's not. And what was it you were saying before, that there's nobody that's just going to shout out goats or something? I think they should.
Oh, totes my goats, right? Because
Toast my goats. Yeah.
I was trying. The problem is if you're writing a dark future book like my other books, what's happening today is their past, or could be their past, depending on the world that you're using. Which makes it kind of hard because it's easy for you to write about the history that you know, but in the time, like, so say I was writing a book in 2200 as opposed to where we are now. Um, what do I do for those 180 or 190 years or however much the distance is between today and when that book is supposed to take place? And because we don't know what the future is, all the great sci-fi writers were trying to make it up, and some of it's come true, some of it hasn't, for better or for worse. But when you're writing your own world, what you have to do is keep in mind what happens in their world isn't the one that you're currently typing in. So slang terms like totes my goats probably aren't going to show up. But that doesn't
It
mean
would be retro, wouldn't it?
Well, say, but it doesn't mean you can't change it to something else, like carry my kid, something that's close. But it just you want to keep your language out of the book unless there's a need for it.
It needs to make sense. The language needs to make sense in the story that it's written, in the context that it's written in. So yeah, I completely understand. But like Totes My Goats is a great one.
Again, a lost chapter.
Do you know what? When the BBC buy it, and want to make a series out of it, have somewhere obscured fucking Totes My Goats. I don't know, something about like, a history of goats or some shit like that. I don't know. Just hidden as an Easter egg just for me. That'd be awesome.
So it shows up when somebody goes, well, what would I do with this? Oh, you tote your goat. Tote my goat? Yeah, and if you get two of them, you can do more than one. Like, tote my goats. Just like,
I just like the encyclopedia of goats. Totes My Goats, the encyclopedia of goats.
There you go.
Just sitting on a shelf somewhere.
As like, a background, right?
Yeah, it'll be great. That does.
What book is that? That's nothing we need. It's a cookbook.
Just in the background, it'll be great. Oh, fucking hell! I think that should totally happen.
Well, if the BBC
if anyone is listening from the BBC.
Yeah.
Well, seriously, thank you for joining me and putting your book out there, because I'm seriously enjoying it. And again, The Blind Servant, if you haven't noticed anything about the last hour and a half, please do buy it. Or even like with Audible, you can even get the little tokens. But if you know anyone that's into science fiction or anything like what you've heard tonight, buy it for them. There's a holiday, apparently. There's 2 holidays or 3 holidays in different religions coming up. So, not just Xmas, there is like Hanukkah and stuff where like there's 8 days of presents. So why not have one of the days?
Aren't we in the middle of Hanukkah right now?
Are we?
Yeah, I thought I saw a menorah lit up somewhere.
Ooh, so there you go. Get it for them now.
Tree holidays.
No, I didn't say no. No, back off.
So,
is there anything else you'd like to tell people about the book or about the series or about yourself?
Well, I'll never tell anybody anything about myself because it's all a lie. Okay. Like I said, I have the second book in process right now. When you get to the end of the first one, do not send me hate mail, please.
But
yeah,
only I have your email. Expect it.
Right, yeah. I have no doubt I'm going to get where's the next one? Like, what? It's going to be like Misery.
I need to know more. What about this?
No, but what I'd really like to say is thank you. Putting yourself out there with a book isn't always that hard because it's kind of anonymous. I mean, unless you become famous and everybody starts looking to hunt you down. But to be able to sit here and just talk to somebody about it is actually harder than I thought it was, and easier at the same time, because I talk to people a lot, but not necessarily about myself or what I do. So I'd like to say thank you for letting me be here and whiskey helped me get through it anyway.
Of course, whiskey helps everything. We all know whiskey helps everything. For myself, thank you for being here. And again, thank you for a wonderful story that I'm really enjoying. And expect notes. That's all I'll say. Expect notes. And no, people, do not send me notes to send to Christopher. That's I mean, I might have the same idea as you, in which case, yeah, expect notes. But for me, anyway, it's encouraging. And for those in the chat that's already got it, that's actually listening to the audiobook, because obviously you have to wait. If you order it on paperback, you have to wait for it. I'm so impatient. So
well, remember, there's
Audible
an ebook too, so you can just download it to your iPad or whatever.
There is. If you have a Kindle, there's a Kindle version as well, and there's So
I prefer B
awesome.
flat. Thanks, Teddy.
But I'm really, really enjoying it. I'm really enjoying it.
Okay, so can I sneak in one really horrible joke?
Go ahead. Go on.
So everybody, when we're talking about notes, everybody knows R. Kelly likes A minor.
Oh, Jesus Christ. That is a bit beyond ouch.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you again, guys, for coming. And share it if you would. This has been fantastic. So thank you so much. Lads in the chat, spam the links, spam the fucking links. I know Tatty will anyway. He's always there.
Yes, thank you all very
and
much.
have a good night, guys. I mean, for me, it's 11:30. For you guys, it's what, 7 o'clock?
Me, 6:30.
Half 7? Half 6?
Yeah,
half past 6. Sorry, 6:30.
See, when you say 6:30, I actually think 5/5, which is the whiskey bottle. Like I'm halfway through it.
Yeah. Well, enjoy your evening and best of luck with the book. Best of luck with the series. I will be looking out for book number 2. When I finish book number 1, because I'm like 3/4 of the way through. It's only 8 hours, guys. Like,
it's only 8 hours.
It's only 8 hours. It's only a full shift. You're grand. It's not, but it's easily digestible, so you can have it on. But you do need to be paying attention to what's being said. It's a fantastic story, and I can't wait for more. I can't wait to. I'm going to listen to it now in a few minutes when we end this stream. The other thing, guys, is just before I finish up, I will not be on Flipside tomorrow. I'm not sure if Reason wants to go ahead with it, but I will not be around. I have a family thing to deal with, so yeah, it's the 10th anniversary for my grandmother, so we have family time. So have a good one. I will see you all possibly next week. Hopefully next week, we'll see. But yeah, thank you again, and best of luck.
Thank you. Have a good night.
So, good night, guys.